"Mom, you should be grateful we still let you be part of this family." Those were the words my son said to me during what I thought was supposed to be a happy family dinner. I remember sitting there at the table, holding my glass of water, trying to understand how a conversation about my birthday had turned into a moment where I felt like a stranger in my own family. I had spent most of my life believing that love meant showing up, giving what you could, and helping the people you cared about when they needed you. I never expected that one day my own son would look at everything I had done and see it as something he was entitled to receive. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and I was 68 years old when I learned that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. For years, I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches and people knew each other by name. After my husband passed away, I stayed in the home we had built together. Every room held memories. Every corner reminded me of the life we had created. I was proud of that home because it represented decades of hard work, patience, and sacrifice. My son Daniel was my only child. Like any mother, I wanted him to have a good life. When he was younger, I spent years making sure he had opportunities one never had. I helped him through college expenses, supported him when he was trying to establish his career, and stood beside him during difficult seasons of his life. I never kept track because that was not how I viewed family. I was not giving him help because I expected something in return. I was helping because he was my son. After Daniel married Rebecca, I tried my best to welcome her into the family. I knew marriage meant Daniel's priorities would change. I never expected to be the center of his world. I only wanted to feel respected and appreciated. But slowly, things began to change. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits became shorter. Conversations that once felt natural started feeling like obligations. I noticed it, but I told myself not to take it personally. I told myself that children grow up and create their own lives. Then came my birthday dinner. Daniel and Rebecca invited me to their house. I thought it would be a simple evening together. I even brought a dessert because I did not want to arrive empty-handed. For the first part of the night, everything seemed normal. We talked about work, the neighborhood, and everyday things. Then the conversation changed. Rebecca started talking about their finances and how expensive everything had become. She mentioned that they had a lot of responsibilities and that supporting everyone was becoming difficult. I was confused because I had always been the person helping them. Then Daniel looked at me and said something I never thought I would hear from my own child. "Mom, you need to understand that you cannot keep depending on us forever." I stared at him because I did not know what he meant. I had my own home. I had my retirement savings. I paid my own bills. Before I could respond, Rebecca added, "Sometimes it feels like you expect everyone else to carry you." Then she used the word that I will never forget. Leech. She said it quietly, almost like it was a fact instead of an insult. In that moment, I felt something inside me change. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not try to prove my worth to people who had already decided how they saw me. I simply looked at them and said, "I understand." They probably thought I was accepting their words. They probably thought I would continue doing what I had always done. But what they did not know was that I had spent my entire life being responsible, and I knew exactly what my next steps would be. That night, I drove home in silence. I looked at the house I had worked so hard to keep, and for the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. How much of my life had I given away while believing I was simply loving my family? The answer would change everything. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. The streets I had traveled hundreds of times suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if I was seeing my own life from a different perspective. I kept thinking about one word: Leech. I replayed that moment over and over again, in my mind, not because the word itself had power over me, but because of who said it. A stranger could have called me anything, and I would have walked away. But hearing it from my son made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship. When I arrived home, I sat in my living room for a long time. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were not. I looked around at the place where I had spent so many years creating memories. The photographs on the walls showed birthdays, holidays, and family moments that once felt unbreakable. I saw a picture of Daniel as a little boy standing beside me in our backyard. He was holding a baseball glove and smiling proudly after his first game. I remembered the promise I made to myself back then. I promised I would always do everything I could to give him a good life. And I had kept that promise. The next morning, I opened a drawer in my home office where I kept important financial records. I was not looking for revenge. I was not trying to punish anyone. I simply needed to understand my own situation clearly. For years, I had quietly helped Daniel and Rebecca more than they realized. When they bought their first home, I contributed money to help with the down payment. When Daniel changed careers and needed extra time to become stable, I helped with expenses. When unexpected bills appeared, I was often the person they called. I never complained because I believed family supported each other. But as I looked through the records, I realized something I had ignored for a long time. My kindness had slowly become an expectation. The help I offered freely had become something they counted on. I was no longer seen as someone giving support. I was being treated like someone who was supposed to provide it. That realization hurt more than the insult itself. I thought about all the times Daniel said, "Mom, I do not know what we would do without you." At the time, those words made me feel appreciated. Now I wondered if they meant something different. Maybe they did not see my sacrifices as gifts. Maybe they saw them as part of their normal life. I spent the next few days thinking carefully before making any decisions. I did not want anger to control me. I did not want one painful conversation to make me act without thinking. I wanted to make choices based on my own future, not their opinions of me. One afternoon, I called my financial advisor. Her name was Susan, and she had helped me manage my retirement plans for years. When I explained that I wanted to review everything, she asked me an important question. "Margaret, are you making this decision because you are hurt, or because you are ready for a new chapter?" I sat quietly for a moment before answering. "Because I am ready for a new chapter." Saying those words out loud felt different. It was the first time in years that I thought about what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed. Susan helped me look at my expenses, my savings, and my future options. She reminded me that I was financially responsible and that I had the right to make choices for myself. That conversation gave me something I had not felt in a long time: confidence. Later that week, Daniel called me. His voice sounded normal, as if nothing had happened. He asked if I could help with another payment they were expecting. For years, I would have said yes without hesitation. But this time I paused. I looked around my quiet home and remembered the words they used against me. I remembered the feeling of being unwanted by the very people I had supported. Then I calmly said something that surprised even me. "Daniel, I think it is time we have a different conversation about money." There was silence on the other end of the phone. He did not know it yet, but that conversation would be the beginning of the biggest change in my life. The silence after I told Daniel that we needed a different conversation about money was longer than I expected. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could almost imagine him trying to understand the meaning behind my words. For years, Daniel had known that if he called me with a problem, I would find a way to help. He never had to wonder whether I would answer the phone. He never had to worry whether I would be there. But that day, something had changed. Not because I stopped loving my son. I loved him more than anyone could understand. What changed was that I finally realized love should not require me to disappear. "Mom, what do you mean?" Daniel finally asked. His voice sounded uncertain. I took a deep breath and looked around my home. "I mean, I need to look at my own future too, Daniel. I have spent many years making sure everyone else was okay. I think it is time I start thinking about myself." There was another pause. Then he said, "Are you saying you are not going to help us anymore?" I noticed something about his question. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not ask why I reached this point. His first concern was whether the support would continue. That answer told me more than any argument could have. I am saying I cannot continue making financial decisions based only on what other people need from me, I replied. I have my own retirement, my own plans, and my own responsibilities. Daniel sounded frustrated. "Mom, we are family." Those words were the ones I had heard many times before. But this time, I heard them differently. Family was exactly why I had helped for so long. Family was exactly why I had sacrificed. But family was also supposed to mean respect. "Yes, Daniel," I said calmly. "We are family. And that is why I hoped you would understand that I deserve consideration too." After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a while. I expected to feel guilty. I expected to wonder if I had been too harsh. But instead, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Relief. For the first time, I was not making a decision out of fear of disappointing someone. I was making a decision because I understood my own value. Over the next few weeks, I started reviewing every financial commitment I had connected to Daniel and Rebecca. I discovered that I was still covering expenses I had originally agreed to help with temporarily. Some of those payments had continued for years. What surprised me was not the money itself. It was how easily temporary help had turned into a permanent expectation. I remembered when I first helped them. Daniel had thanked me. Rebecca had hugged me and told me they would never forget my kindness. I believed those words. I wanted to believe them. But somewhere along the way, gratitude had been replaced by expectation. That was the part one needed to change. I did not cancel anything immediately. I took my time. I spoke with my advisor. I reviewed my options. I made sure every decision was responsible and clear. I wanted my actions to come from wisdom, not anger. Then one morning, I received a message from Rebecca. She asked if I was upset about what happened at dinner. I looked at the screen for several minutes before answering. Part of me wanted to explain every hurt feeling I had carried. Part of me wanted her to understand how deeply those words affected me. But I knew something important. People who truly want to understand will listen without needing a long explanation. I simply replied, I am not angry. I am thinking about what is best for my future. A few hours later, Rebecca called me. Her tone was different. She sounded less confident than before. She asked if we could talk. During that conversation, she admitted that she and Daniel had become comfortable with my help. She said they never thought about how much responsibility I was carrying because I always made it look easy. Hearing that did not erase the pain, but it gave me a clearer picture. Sometimes people do not recognize the weight you carry because you have spent years carrying it silently. After that call, I walked through my house and looked at everything differently. The furniture, the photographs, the memories. This home was not just a place where I lived. It was a reminder of everything I had built on my own. And that was when I realized my next decision would be bigger than changing payments. I needed to decide what kind of life I wanted to create from this point forward. After that conversation with Rebecca, I spent a quiet evening sitting in my favorite chair near the living room window. The sun was setting behind the trees, and I watched the neighborhood slowly become covered in golden light. For years, I had looked at that view and felt grateful. This was the home where Daniel took his first steps. This was the place where my husband and I celebrated holidays, birthdays, and countless ordinary moments that became precious memories. But that night, I saw my home differently. I realized I had been holding on to the house because of the memories inside it, not because it was still the right place for the next chapter of my life. The conversation with Daniel and Rebecca had changed something in me. I no longer wanted to spend my days trying to prove that I was useful. I did not want my value to depend on how much I could provide for others. I wanted to create a life where I could simply be Margaret, not a mother solving problems, not a financial safety net, not someone people remembered only when they needed help. Just Margaret. The next morning, I called my real estate agent, Linda. She had helped my husband and me when we first bought the house decades earlier. When I told her I was considering selling, there was a long pause. Margaret, are you sure? She asked. This house has been your home for so many years. I smiled softly. That is exactly why I know it is time to think carefully about what comes next. Linda came over that afternoon, and we walked through every room together. She listened as I shared memories connected to each space. The kitchen where I prepared family dinners. The backyard where Daniel played during summer vacations. The small room where my husband kept his old books. I was not saying goodbye to the memories. Those would always belong to me. I was simply accepting that memories could travel with me. They did not have to stay inside four walls. When Linda finished reviewing the house, she gave me an estimate of its value. I was surprised by how much the property had increased over the years. My husband and I had purchased it with careful planning and patience. We had never imagined it would become such an important part of our financial security. That evening, I reviewed my options with Susan, my financial advisor. She helped me understand what selling the house could mean for my future. I could move somewhere smaller, reduce my expenses, and finally have more freedom to explore the things I had postponed for years. Travel, new experiences, meeting new people, building a life based on what I wanted instead of what others expected. For the first time, the idea of leaving did not feel like losing something. It felt like opening a door. A few days later, I told Daniel about my decision. I expected him to be surprised, but I did not expect his reaction. You are selling the house? He asked. His voice immediately changed. Mom, why would you do that? I looked out the window before answering. Because I want a different future. There was silence. Then he asked, but what about the house staying in the family? I heard the meaning behind his words. He was not just asking about the property. He was thinking about what he believed would eventually belong to him. Daniel, I said calmly, this house was never an inheritance plan. It was my home. It was my life. And I have the right to decide what happens next. He became quiet. I think that was the first time he truly understood that I was no longer making decisions based on what everyone else wanted. I was making decisions for myself. Over the next month, I prepared the house for sale. I packed carefully, keeping only the things that mattered most. Old photographs. A few pieces of furniture with sentimental value. Letters from my husband. Items that represented memories, not just possessions. When the day came to put the house on the market, I stood outside for a moment and looked at it one last time. I felt sadness, but I also felt peace. This house had given me beautiful memories. It had protected me through difficult years. It had been part of my story, but it was not the entire story. As I closed the door behind me that day, I knew one thing for certain. I was not walking away from my life. I was finally choosing where the next chapter would begin. The day I officially sold my house was a day I thought would feel much harder than it actually did. For months, that home had represented stability, memories, and the life I had built with my husband. I expected to feel like I was losing something important. Instead, as I stood in the empty living room for the final time, I felt something unexpected. I felt free. The walls that once held so many memories were not disappearing. The laughter, the holidays, the conversations, and the love that filled that home would always remain part of me. I was not leaving my past behind. I was carrying it with me into a new beginning. The closing process was completed on a quiet Friday morning. Linda, my real estate agent, met me at the office to finalize everything. She smiled and handed me the documents after everything was signed. "Margaret, I hope you know this is a brave decision," she said. I smiled because I was not sure I felt brave. For a long time, I had simply felt tired. Tired of always being the person everyone expected to solve problems. Tired of feeling guilty whenever I chose something for myself. Tired of believing that saying no made me a bad mother. But now I understood something important. Protecting my own future was not selfish. It was responsible. After the sale was complete, I moved into a smaller home in a peaceful town several hours away. It was not as large as my old house, but it had everything I needed. A comfortable kitchen, a small backyard, and a quiet neighborhood where I could start fresh. The first morning there, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise. I realized I had not done something that simple in years. I had spent so much time worrying about everyone else's needs that I forgot how much I enjoyed peaceful moments. A few days after my move, Daniel called. At first, I thought he wanted to check on me, but I quickly realized he wanted to discuss the house. "Mom, I still cannot believe you actually sold it," he said. His tone sounded disappointed. I stayed calm. "Daniel, I made the decision that was right for me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Did you really have to leave?" That question surprised me, because I realized he was not asking if I was happy. He was asking why I had removed myself from the life he expected me to continue living. "Daniel," I said gently, "I did not leave because I stopped loving my family. I left because I needed to remember who I was outside of being everyone's support system." He did not answer immediately. I think those words were difficult for him to hear because they were true. For years, Daniel had seen me as the person who helped. He had not considered that the person giving support also needed care and understanding. Later that week, Rebecca called me. Her voice sounded different from before. She asked how I was settling in and whether I liked my new home. I told her I did. I told her about the local shops, the friendly neighbors, and the walking trails nearby. "You sound happy," she said. I smiled. "I am." There was a pause before she responded. "I think I understand now." I listened quietly. Rebecca admitted that she had focused too much on what they needed from me and not enough on what I needed for myself. She said that seeing me make such a big change forced her to think differently. I appreciated her honesty. It did not erase what happened, but it showed that maybe some lessons were finally being learned. Over the next few months, I started creating a new routine. I joined a local gardening group. I visited places I had always wanted to see. I made new friends who knew me simply as Margaret, not as Daniel's mother or the person who could always provide help. That feeling was something I had almost forgotten. Being valued for who I was, not for what I could give. One evening, while organizing some old photographs, I found a picture of Daniel as a child. I smiled when I saw his little face and remembered all the years of love between us. My heart still cared about my son. That would never change. But I also knew something else now. Loving someone does not mean allowing them to decide your worth. I had spent years building a life for my family. Now, I was finally building one for myself. And as I looked around my new home, I realized the greatest change was not the place where I lived. The greatest change was the woman I had become. For the first time in many years, my days belonged completely to me. At first, that feeling was unfamiliar. I had spent so much of my life following routines built around other people's needs that having an empty calendar almost felt strange. There were no urgent phone calls asking for help, no unexpected expenses to solve, no pressure to prove that I was useful. Instead, there was quiet. And slowly, I began to realize that quiet was not loneliness. Quiet was freedom. My new town was smaller than where I had lived before, but it had a warmth that made me feel welcome. The neighbors smiled when they passed by. People introduced themselves without asking who I was connected to. They did not know me as Daniel's mother. They did not know my past. They only knew me as Margaret. That simple feeling meant more than I expected. I joined a local gardening group after noticing a community garden near my home. I had always enjoyed taking care of flowers, but over the years, my own hobbies had become less important than everyone else's responsibilities. Now, I had time to enjoy the little things again. I spent Saturday mornings planting flowers, sharing stories with new friends, and drinking coffee while talking about everyday life. It reminded me of a version of myself I had almost forgotten. A woman who had interests, dreams, and plans that existed beyond her role as a mother. Meanwhile, my relationship with Daniel changed slowly. At first, our conversations were careful. We were both learning how to speak honestly without falling back into old patterns. Daniel still struggled with understanding how deeply his words had affected me. I knew he was sorry, but I also knew apologies could not instantly repair years of feeling taken for granted. One evening, he called and asked about my new home. He sounded genuinely curious. "Mom, do you really like it there?" he asked. I smiled. "I do. I think I needed this change more than I realized." He became quiet. Then he said something I did not expect. "I think I forgot that you had your own dreams." I sat there for a moment because those words were exactly what I had hoped he would understand. "Daniel," I said, "I never wanted you to feel like you could not build your own life. I wanted you to remember that I had a life too." He apologized again, but this time it felt different. It was not an apology because he wanted the situation to go away. It was an apology because he finally understood the reason behind my decisions. A few weeks later, Daniel and Rebecca visited my new home. I was nervous at first. Part of me worried that old habits would return. I wondered if they would look around and see what I had left behind instead of appreciating what I had created. But when they arrived, something felt different. Rebecca complimented my garden. Daniel noticed the small details around the house. They asked questions about my new friends and the places I had visited. They were not there because they needed something. They were there because they wanted to spend time with me. That difference was important. During dinner, Daniel looked around the table and said, "Mom, I want you to know something. I used to think you were always there because you wanted to help us. I never considered that you might need someone to be there for you too." I listened carefully. Those words were not a perfect solution to everything that happened, but they showed growth. I had spent years hoping my son would understand my sacrifices. Now, he was beginning to understand my humanity. After they left, I sat outside and watched the evening sky. I thought about the journey that brought me there, the hurt, the disappointment, the difficult choices. I realized that if everything had gone differently, I might never have discovered this version of myself. I might have continued putting everyone else first while quietly forgetting my own needs. The truth was, leaving did not mean I abandoned my family. It meant I stopped abandoning myself. I still loved Daniel. I still cared about Rebecca, but I no longer measured my worth by how much I could give. I measured it by who I was. And that was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. However, I knew the story was not finished yet. Because forgiveness was one thing. Rebuilding a family relationship after someone realizes they have taken you for granted was something much deeper. For a long time, I believed that forgiveness meant returning to the way things were before. I thought that if someone apologized and admitted their mistake, the relationship would naturally go back to normal. But as I rebuilt my relationship with Daniel, I learned something important. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It creates a chance to build something better from what was broken. The old relationship I had with my son was based on love, but it also had something unhealthy mixed into it. I had spent so many years solving problems for him that we both forgot where support ended and responsibility began. I was his mother, but I was not responsible for carrying every burden in his life. That realization changed everything. A few months after my move, Daniel called and asked if we could have a serious conversation. He said he wanted to come visit me alone. When he arrived, I noticed he seemed different. He was not rushing through the conversation. He was not trying to explain away what happened. He simply sat across from me and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I nodded and waited. "I was wrong," he said. Those 3 words carried more meaning than all the explanations he had given before. He continued, "I spent years seeing everything you did for me, but I never stopped to think about what it cost you." I looked down at my hands because those were the words I had needed to hear for so long. Not because I wanted him to feel guilty, but because I wanted him to understand. "Daniel," I said, "the hardest part was not the money. It was feeling like I only mattered because of what I could provide." He looked emotional. "I know that now." We sat quietly for a moment. Then he told me something that surprised me. He said that after I moved away, he and Rebecca had to start handling their own responsibilities. They had to make different choices because they no longer assumed I would step in whenever something became difficult. At first, he admitted, it was uncomfortable. But eventually, it made them stronger. They learned to plan better. They learned to communicate more honestly. They learned that accepting help should never mean expecting it forever. Hearing that gave me peace. Not because I wanted them to struggle, but because I wanted them to grow. A parent's greatest hope is not that their children always need them. It is that their children become capable of standing on their own. Later that afternoon, Daniel walked around my home and looked at the garden I had created. He smiled and said, "Mom, you really built a new life here." I smiled back. "Yes, I did." He paused before saying, "I think I was afraid of losing you, but I did not realize I was the one creating distance." That honesty meant something to me, because for the first time, Daniel was not only apologizing for what he did. He was understanding the consequences of his actions. A few weeks later, Rebecca visited me again. This time, our conversation felt easier. We sat outside and talked for hours. She told me she had been thinking about the night she called me a burden. She admitted that she had spoken from frustration and fear, but she understood now that those feelings did not justify disrespect. "I wish I had seen you differently," she said. "I should have seen the woman who helped us, not just the person who could help us." I appreciated those words because they showed maturity. I did not need Rebecca to pretend the past never happened. I only needed her to recognize it. Slowly, our family began creating a new balance. Daniel called because he wanted to talk, not because he needed assistance. Rebecca shared parts of her life with me because she wanted a relationship, not because she wanted support. And I learned how to love them without losing myself. Looking back, I realized the most important change was not that I moved away. The most important change was that everyone finally understood boundaries. I could be a loving mother without being responsible for every problem. I could forgive without returning to the same situation. I could care about my family while still choosing myself. But there was still one final decision I needed to make. Because after everything that happened, I had to decide what role I wanted my family to have in this new life I had created. For the first time in many years, I stopped measuring my relationship with Daniel by how much he needed me. I stopped asking myself whether I was doing enough, giving enough, or sacrificing enough to prove that I was a good mother. Instead, I started asking a different question. Was this relationship bringing love and respect into both of our lives? That question changed the way I saw everything. I still loved my son. That would never change. But I finally understood that love could exist alongside boundaries. I could care about him without carrying every responsibility for him. I could forgive him without forgetting the lesson I learned. My new life in my small town continued to grow in ways I never expected. I became involved in my community. I spent time with friends who knew me for who I was, not for what I could provide. I discovered hobbies I had ignored for years because I was always focused on someone else. I joined a local book club and started taking morning walks around the nearby park. Those simple moments reminded me that happiness does not always come from big changes. Sometimes it comes from finally giving yourself permission to enjoy ordinary days. Daniel noticed the difference in me. During one of his visits, he looked around my home and said, "Mom, you seem happier than I have seen you in years." I smiled because I knew exactly why. I think I finally stopped waiting for everyone else to be okay before allowing myself to be okay. He nodded slowly. I could tell those words affected him. For so long, he had viewed my support as something natural. Now he was beginning to understand that behind every sacrifice was a person with feelings and dreams of her own. A few months later, Daniel and Rebecca invited me to their home for a family dinner. I accepted because I wanted to see how far we had all come. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. The atmosphere felt different. There was no tension, no uncomfortable conversations about money, no expectations. We simply spent time together as a family. During dinner, Rebecca surprised me by bringing up something from the past. She said, "Margaret, I have been thinking about what happened for a long time. I realize now that I made you feel like your value was connected to what you could do for us. That was unfair." I appreciated her honesty. I did not need a perfect apology. I needed a sincere understanding. "Rebecca," I said, "we all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." She smiled and nodded. That moment was important because it showed me that healing was possible, not because we erased the past, but because we stopped pretending it did not happen. Later that evening, Daniel and I stood outside talking. He looked toward the sky and said, "I wish I could go back and handle things differently." I smiled gently. We all have moments we wish we could change, but sometimes those moments teach us the things we needed to learn. He looked at me and said, "I thought losing your help would be the hardest part, but losing your trust was harder." Those words stayed with me, because that was the truth. Money was never the center of the story. The house was never the center of the story. The real issue was whether my family saw me as a person worthy of respect. And now, finally, they did. Over time, our relationship found a new balance. Daniel became more independent. Rebecca became more thoughtful. And I became more confident in protecting my own peace. I no longer felt guilty for saying no. I no longer worried that choosing myself meant I loved my family less. In fact, I realized the opposite was true. By respecting myself, I taught my family how to respect me too. Looking back at that difficult dinner when I first heard those painful words, I see it differently now. At the time, I thought my family had rejected me. But maybe that moment forced all of us to grow. Maybe it showed us the parts of our relationship that needed attention. Maybe it gave us the chance to build something healthier. I had spent years creating a home for my family. Then I spent time creating a home within myself. And that was the greatest change of all. But as I looked toward the future, I knew there was still one final lesson waiting for me. Because forgiveness was not the end of my journey. It was the beginning of understanding what my life truly belonged to. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest part of my journey was never leaving my old home. It was learning that my worth was not determined by how much I could give to other people. For most of my life, I believed being a good mother meant always being available. I believed love meant making sacrifices without hesitation. And in many ways, that belief created beautiful moments. It helped me build a strong relationship with my son when he was young. It allowed me to support him during difficult times. It gave me the joy of knowing I had helped someone I loved. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that I was also a person with dreams, needs, and a future of my own. The painful words I heard that night at Daniel and Rebecca's dinner table changed me. At first, I thought they had taken something away from me. I thought they had taken away my place in my own family. But with time, I realized that moment gave me something I had lost. It gave me the courage to choose myself. My new life was not perfect. There were still moments when I missed the old days. There were times when I looked at old photographs and remembered the years when Daniel was young. I remembered his first day of school, family vacations, and the simple moments that made motherhood such a meaningful part of my life. Those memories were still precious. I never wanted to erase them. But I also learned that loving the past does not mean you have to stay trapped in it. Life continues, and we are allowed to continue with it. Over time, my relationship with Daniel became stronger in a different way. We no longer connected because I was solving problems for him. We connected because we genuinely wanted to spend time together. Our conversations became more honest. We talked about feelings, experiences, and lessons we had both learned. Daniel once told me, "Mom, I wish I had understood sooner." I smiled and answered, "Sometimes people understand things when they are ready to see them." I meant it. I did not want my son to live with guilt forever. I wanted him to grow. I wanted him to become the kind of person who understood the value of kindness and respect. Rebecca also became an important part of my life again. Our relationship was not the same as before, but in some ways, it became more authentic. We no longer pretended everything was perfect. We learned to communicate honestly. We learned that family relationships require effort from everyone. not just one person constantly giving. Looking back, I think that was the greatest lesson from everything that happened. A family is not built only on history. It is built on respect. It is built on understanding. It is built on the willingness to see each other as complete human beings, not just as roles we expect people to play. I was not only a mother. I was Margaret, a woman who had lived, worked, loved, struggled, and grown. A woman who still had dreams waiting to be discovered. The small house I moved into became more than just a new place to live. It became a reminder that every person deserves a space where they feel valued. Every person deserves relationships where love is given freely, not measured by what they can provide. And every person deserves the chance to begin again, no matter their age. Today, when I sit on my porch and watch the morning sun rise, I feel grateful. Not because my journey was easy, but because it taught me something I needed to know. I can love my family and still choose myself. I can forgive people and still protect my peace. I can care deeply without losing who I am. The woman who left that old house was not running away. She was moving toward a life she had forgotten she deserved. And the greatest gift I gave myself was not a new home, a new town, or a fresh start. It was the understanding that I was never a burden. I was always someone worthy of love, respect, and a life of my own.